is. Okay. And we're on. Good evening, everyone. With the posted time having arrived and a quorum of members present, I'll call the Finance Committee meeting for Tuesday, November 7th, 2023 to order. The first item on our agenda is the minutes from our last meeting and all of the budget workshops. So 10:10, 10:17, 10:19, 10:24, and 10:30. All of those were included in the packets. Did anyone note any corrections or revisions that they wanted to see? If not, I'll take a motion to approve all of those minutes. Motion from Watson. Is there a second? Second from Martins. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. The minutes are approved. Item number 2 is discussion and possible action regarding special assessments for the 2023 street construction project C, North 17th Avenue from Stewart Avenue to Elm Street. You see a memo in the packets from the engineering department. The project has been delayed. They've had some construction delays and they've had some hurdles with water testing and things. And it looks like the final completion of that project is now set for the spring. They're looking to levy those assessments at that point when they're done with the work. In the past, when they've had street delays, we've done that, not build the adjacent property owners until the work was done. Does anyone have questions on that at all? We do have Eric in the back of the room if you have questions. If not, is there a motion then to levy those assessments at completion? Motion by Martins. Is there a second? Second from Dinny. Further discussion? Seeing none, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None are opposed. That motion carries. Item number 3 is discussion and possible action on establishing the 2024 property tax equivalent for the waterworks. You'll recall we started to touch on this subject during our budget workshops and decided to do a little deeper dive into it tonight. Obviously, a resolution is required from us and the council to set that payment, even though statutorily we could expect a larger payment from the utility. We have the last couple of years been forgiving some of that, both to improve the financial health of the utility, but then also maintain some stability in our budgeting. You'll have at your desks, Mary Ann passed out a comparison among Wisconsin communities for what their utility pilot payments are and which communities, if any, are forgiving part of their pilot payment obligation. You'll see that that forgiveness is occurring in Wausau, it's occurring in Manitowoc, and it's occurring in Oshkosh. Every other city is not forfeiting any of their pilot payment from their utilities. We obviously, we have the resolution in the packets that would hold the amount at the same amount that it's been right along. And so I think the discussion that we started with in our budget workshops is that if we were wanting to reduce that payment further than we already have, I mean, we're basically almost $500,000, I think, forgiving for this year, right? So if we wanted to reduce that any further, we would then have to find budget cuts. We'd either have to find cuts within the departments, we'd have to cut projects, capital, staff, or services. So that choice was what we were presented with in the workshops, and that remains. I guess, Mary Ann, do you have anything else on this situation? I know you've talked with Ellers in the past about, you know, their recommendations on what we should or shouldn't do.
I guess, you know, we did go through about 21 communities, and you could see that there are not very many communities, full-service cities that are forgiving any of their tax equivalent. I think always whenever we're trying to make changes in the budget, minor changes are easier to absorb than dramatic changes. Mm-hmm. We did get confirmation late this afternoon because we weren't quite sure what the PSC actually used in the rate study.
Right.
And they did confirm that they had used the 1.5 million. So, you know, if you made changes to the pilot and we wanted to try to impact the utility rates, we would have to put together a full rate study with the PSC, which, you know, I think takes probably 8 months.
Right.
And
Well, we're
You know, I
just
think
coming
that-
off the heels of one of those, right? Which is
Right.
where we, yep.
And I think the difficulty right now is that, you know, we still have not got a full year of expenses with the new facility. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. The other thing is this current rate study was designed to recover the GAC financing. So, there will be those expenses that we will be able to absorb without another study. We also, at some point, would be able to go back and look, because if we receive a lot of federal dollars, that might help us financially on the utility as well, and we would, want to disclose that and look at that for the rate study. And I think the other thing is, if you made swift changes to the tax equivalent and you were not able to absorb those savings in the budget, the levy limit becomes a problem, because if you try to increase the levy, there is no, I guess, adjustment provision for tax equivalent today, so you would have to, if you wanted to increase the taxes above the levy limit, you would have to go to referendum on that.
Right. I guess my concern also is that we used an awful lot in the last 2 years. We've used an awful lot of ARPA money to offset maintenance and capital within the utility, so to stem the utilities borrowing.
Right.
And I think, obviously those funds have a finite end, and the needs of the department don't go away. I mean, the needs of the facilities don't go away, but then every year we do street and road projects and things that they are basically forced to share a part of, depending on how many streets get picked. I mean, we all know that we've got 40 miles of streets that need to be done that are rated worse than level 5. We certainly can't do them all at once, but, every year we try to pick a few, and the utility is obligated then to fund their portion of that as well. So, I think it makes sense to hold the line on the pilot. I certainly wouldn't favor taking more from the utility, but I think that we should be cautious when we consider taking less, only because I think that, we've discussed before that there are more water and sewer utility customers than there are property tax payers. And so when we talk about the reach of those water bills and those fees, you also then are including water customers that are tax exempt, like hospitals and schools and churches. All of those people use water. Some of them use water in large amounts. And so you essentially create a free pass for those entities, much like we already do with stormwater, and then the property taxpayers are left to bear that burden. So, that's been, I think a struggle that we've talked about in the past as well. We've talked about things like stormwater utilities and whatnot, to try to spread out some of that pain for the residential homeowner that seems to today get all of it. And, I guess I'd be reluctant to create more of that for individual homeowners. So I guess, what do you guys think on holding the line on the payment? It seemed like that's where we left off in our workshops. Michael?
Are we remind me, for the budget this coming year, are we anticipating to forgive a part of the?
Yes.
So basically, we're gonna hold
freezing it.
At that 1.5 million that
Yes.
we did last year.
Yep.
So we aren't going to take the full 2 million that we would be.
Right, and the
entitled to.
calculation that I provided you in the packet was 2022's.
Yeah.
So most likely it would go up, because that was based on construction in progress at 1/1/2022. Obviously, during 2022 and then 23, we've put more money into those, into the facility, and so I would expect that rate to go up.
Okay, but we wouldn't, but if we forgive the entire pilot for this coming budget cycle, that would be, $1.5 million is an awful big
Right.
burden on the levy. And
Yeah.
I'm just trying to do the math in my head, what that would be the effect to
Yeah,
the
and
mill
you-
rate.
Well, and you wouldn't really be able to because of the levy limit.
The levy, yeah, that would stop us at some
Right.
point.
Right. That also is a factor. I mean, obviously, there's a top end on that, but then, you also then run up against, some serious, in the past, when we've tried to make sweeping cuts, whether it was in the context of avoiding a mill rate increase or even trying to facilitate a mill rate decrease all in 1 year, even though that decision feels great and, people may get a $50 break on their tax bill, We also in the past have been put in the position where we have tried to mitigate or cut services or delay services or scale down services. People lose their mind over stuff like that. So, I mean, even one time it was mowing in the parks. One time it was, during the Great Recession, we furloughed all the employees, for a period of time. And, that doesn't bode well. And so, I think we have to be cautious. We've hired a whole bunch of public safety employees in the fire department that we, when that grant funding expires, are going to need to absorb as well. So, I think holding the line makes sense. But, I think even if a person wanted to start to, in future years, incrementally either freeze or reduce that pilot payment, that should be done in small bites, not big bites. So, I feel like it's an 11th hour decision for us to do it this year. If it's something that we wanted to look forward to for '25, that's different, but then we'd have to factor in where we will come up with whatever money we've deferred. So, if it comes through tax-based growth, that would be an easier decision to make. But this year, we were pretty lean when we started to whittle down. We started out with a 41-cent increase and then landed at 26. But, we had whittled that down pretty well, and we denied a bunch of capital and supplements to get to that point. So I feel like we came out of the budget workshops in a good place, I guess. What do you guys think? Doug?
Thank you. I guess my comment was more on a philosophical basis here, because these taxes are really hidden taxes, and they're kind of arguably more regressive, because rich people and poor people use water. Big users, small users, households with children are usually younger families, typically earning less, but their water use is potentially higher than old single guys like me. So I think it's a philosophical issue we should look at. It's a new complex, so we're basing it off of the value of the property times the
Tax rate.
tax rate. Okay, so as a percentage of revenue, maybe that would be a better way to maybe judge it. And if we thought something was fair, like a certain percentage, I don't know the exact percentage. Are we at now 15, 16, 20%? I don't know for sure.
It's about 18%.
18%. I'd like to see us come down to maybe closer to 10%. I mean, that's just arbitrary, but maybe that's something we should think through that process. And then if we determine that's a good number, roughly, let's put a mark on the calendar 5 years out, 4 years out, and try to whittle it down. So, obviously it would be a shock to take this out today, but let's put our future glasses on and think about that. And that would also eliminate the potential for a rate increase again, which on top of, I'm not even suggesting right now to lower the rate, but we're talking about maybe staving off future increases.
Well, it would make sense also that, if we were going to make a change, let's say that, after we've got a year of experience under our belts with the operating costs of the new facility, we still don't even know if the solar project is going to take flight to reduce the electric usage or offset some of that cost at the plant. I mean, there's things that are still in flux with that, but once we have more concrete numbers and some more concrete experience, it certainly makes sense that we would have those conversations. I think it's helpful that we just recently found out that we are getting some grant funding to help us with things like lead pipes and PFAS that are maybe a little bit more than what we expected. But if it was going to take us 8 months to complete a rate case anyway, to get the PSC to adjust our numbers, given our timeline to pass a budget, we don't have that kind of time now. We certainly should look forward to those conversations, though, for '25. Go ahead.
So clear that question up then on the PSC. This action doesn't involve the PSC, or does it if we lower it?
Well, we have to submit the resolution to the PSC, otherwise they're going to expect us to charge the full amount to the utility.
The $2 million.
Right,
Got it,
but
got it.
reducing it doesn't change our rate. You have to actually submit for a rate increase, produce all of the documentation on all expenses, do your projections on revenues, and then, and so, when we do that, if inflation has impacted our expenses, it could defray some of the impact on the tax equivalent, reductions.
Sure, no, I understand that part. I guess just looking to try to smooth it
Yeah.
down as a percentage of their operating costs and their revenue.
Sure.
Would seem to be, because I mean, we may get a drastic reduction in water usage once people start paying these bills. So.
Well, it's true.
We
People's-
reduce revenue, now we're even reducing.
People's willingness to conserve may be greater. I mean, we've not seen that yet. I mean, the last stage of those rate increases just came in. But also knowing that, a swift reduction in the pilot doesn't cause an immediate impact to those rates, so.
Yeah, no,
I think
agree.
the other thing, when we've compared ourselves to other communities that have a separate garbage charge and stormwater, I guess I would look at those as regressive also. And so, like maybe we're less regressive than some communities because we don't have all of those other things. I think when we looked at garbage, for example, and we looked at actual property values, we said there were homes that were paying $14 for garbage, and then there were homes paying $900 for garbage because it's based on their property values.
But then when we analyze that, a uniform cost, taking it off of the levy, each home in the city would have paid something like $52 for the year to remove garbage, which seemed like a fair distribution, because they're all putting out the same cart. In some cases, the lid shuts, and in some cases, it doesn't. But now, in the past, before we had the uniform garbage collection carts, people put out as much as they wanted in whatever containers they chose. So you could have garbage at one house that goes from, curb to curb, and then you could have someone that puts out like a grocery store bag. And then all of these different costs. Now, people are putting out the same cart every week, full or not, and the service that they all get is exactly the same, which is where some uniformity makes some sense. We've not made that move, but, when we've compared our tax rate to other communities that have these other things in place, it's no wonder that their mill rates are slightly less. So, it just makes some sense when you look at communities that charge a flat fee for garbage. It all comes out on the tax bill, but it's not built into the value of a person's home. So, not that we're doing that this year, but it makes some sense when you try to compare apples and oranges when a community does it the other way. Weston's a great example. They're having a separate charge for that, even though it appears on the bill. It's not part of that mill rate calculation. So, it makes them dramatically different when people say, well, I'm not going to buy a house in Wausau because the taxes are too high. That's one factor for why they're higher. And that stuff cumulatively starts to add up too. So, go ahead.
Well, certainly those are other avenues we can look for Mary Ann's revenue diversity. Is that the term you use, Mary Ann? I forget.
Right?
But in terms of this particular fee, I think it does look relatively high compared to revenue. So, I think we need to find a way, or at least a philosophy here on setting our sights on a potentially lower rate to help taxpayers and ratepayers.
I think it would be helpful for us in the first half of '24. We start our budget process for '25 in July. I think it would be helpful for us during the first few months of '24 to do some analysis as far as what a gradual reduction would look like and what impact that would have on the core budgets that we manage, what impact it might have on the levy. I think we need to make educated decisions. We can't, come in the 11th hour and decide that, well, we just feel like a pilot payment's a terrible idea and then pull the plug. So, or just slash and burn arbitrarily.
Wasn't suggesting
No,
that.
I know,
yeah.
but I think that if we're going to have those discussions, we need to have, I know that Phil Cosson has presented some suggestions on that to us from Ellers in the past when he's done some analysis for the Water Commission specifically. And so I think it would help to have some of those numbers in front of us. And he had some data for the up and down side of making those decisions because he's advising communities all over Wisconsin on what to do. And so he's seeing it beyond just Wausau. And so, I think there's some data to be gained if we would analyze that. We can do it in this committee or the Water Commission can do it. But I think it's important to have some firm numbers as far as what would happen. I think it's a fallacy to assume that because you reduce the pilot payment that everyone's taxes are automatically going down and that their water bills are immediately going down because they really aren't. So, you hate to get people all excited about something that's going to be immediate relief and then it's not. If it takes 8 months to do a rate case and they're paying their property taxes at the end of December, we're not doing people any favors. If we study it and figure something out for next year, it makes a little sense. Right? What do you guys think?
I guess my concern is that we've got, there's too many unknowns here. We've, I mean, you know, like you've said that the water plant hasn't been running for an entire year yet, and, you know, Mary Ann said we don't know what all of our expenses are going to be. We do know, you know, we do know that if we forgive the tax equivalent for this coming year, you know, the rates will not go down until a rate case is made in the Public Service Commission approves it. So we could go through that rate case. We could find out that it doesn't help, and there we are stuck with a higher levy on the property taxes and no relief on the water side of things. You know, I see the merit to it, but I also, you know, I want to see how some of these other things play out, like a loan forgiveness for
Yeah.
you know, for especially, you know, that we're anticipating, you know, from the Clean Water Act. Some of the other, you know, and what our actual expenses are going to be, you know, when that GAC system is up and online.
Right.
Because it's still under, you know, it hasn't, we haven't turned the key on that yet, so we don't know. And I just feel like if we, you know, if we do something now, we're just going to suffer some unintended consequences down the road, and it's not, you know, I just don't want to be there at
I think
this point in time.
I agree. I think that's smart. I think that, you know, even if we get some help with the payment for the GAC solution, which, you know, I think we've been able to leverage some help on that on the state and federal side, which is a godsend. But, you know, I think if we also know that to get those facilities built and running, we've taken on, you know, almost $80 million in debt to get them up and running. We've got that amount of debt to retire. And then we also have ongoing maintenance of those facilities, and the projects don't stop coming. So, you know, one of the reasons we got a little bit behind on some of those things with the water and sewer plant, the sewer plant specifically, when I first came on the council, we had made some cuts. I think we had, I don't know if we reduced the pilot payment, but I don't think we were collecting as much as we should have been. And there was an awful lot of deferred maintenance on that old facility. And, you know, they would do just enough to get by. And there was a lot of Band-Aid fixing that got done, you know, a number of councils ago, because they were afraid to put the money in that needed to be put in to keep things running. So, you know, I mean, with the new facility, we certainly don't want to run it on a shoestring and then run it in the ground. So, but I guess this item is going to council next, at our next meeting on the 21st, not tonight. You know, I think that there is a request for us to take action on whether or not we want to hold the line for this year, because if we don't take action on this item, then we're expected to take the full $2 million, which we don't want all of that money. So we've got that decision to make tonight. So, Tom, come on up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few comments on this item, and I had the opportunity to hear some of the commentary within the last 5 or 10 minutes. And I would just say, I think one important clarification for the public is to let them know right out of the gate that this pilot and the tax equivalent payment, which does add considerably to the rates and a percentage of the rate increase, has absolutely nothing to do with water. So, you know, I think people in town, they're very reasonable and vigilant about what it takes to have sufficient technology and plant upgrades and the costs involved in that to do so, because it's a critical matter of health. But with the tax equivalent, that has nothing to do with water, okay? And we should look at it, as was brought up, in terms of the regressive nature. So when we look at income taxes or property taxes to some degree. They go up with income, but with water, or you mentioned fees, that's a great example. Those are highly regressive in nature because if someone of a lower income is using them and paying for them at kind of that uniform rate, then as a percentage of their income, whether it's theirs or their families, they're paying a much higher percentage of that than a higher income family paying for the same volume of the same offering. So it's highly regressive in nature, and so are fees. And it's a similar challenge, although water just happens to be kind of a life-sustaining element. I believe that's why the state of Wisconsin doesn't allow taxes on certain things like prescription drugs or other, life mission critical things, because it's, as the author of the 2021 Journal Sentinel piece stated, it's kind of a morally dubious way of funding the government. And so when the term forgiveness is used, it's kind of misleading, because my understanding is when you look at administrative code, it's not saying you have to charge this amount. If I'm not mistaken, administrative code is setting out the calculations of the maximum amount that one can charge. So I think if the sentiments I'm hearing tonight are sincere, then what we should begin to do immediately, perhaps it's after this budget round, is to come up, start deliberating on what is going to be our policy strategy to ultimately phase this out entirely down the road, because make no mistake, it has significant impacts on rates. So, Ms. Grote had mentioned in multiple meetings that can be reviewed on public access that just the proposal of looking at $0 over 10 years would bring, if I understand it correctly, a 20 percentage point decrease in the increase. That's huge. So, the next question would be, and maybe the answer can be given from Ms. Grote and Ehlers at our council meeting in a couple weeks, what would be the percentage point drop if that was phased out entirely? Because as the author of the Journal Sentinel piece points out, in some other communities, this can consist of almost 50% of rates. That's how heavy it is. So I had brought this up, I don't know, it's probably 3 to 6 months ago. I don't remember the exact date. Someone can correct me if that's not correct. But the point is, I think had we started to look at this seriously 3 to 6 months ago, we might be 2/3 of the way there on our rate study already. So I think we've wasted quite a bit of time already. Even if the body, both the committee and the council doesn't feel this is something that we can kind of take down substantially this year, I think we can look at a plan, start talking about a plan to start cutting this down, because it does not have anything to do with water. We need to keep the rates lower. And I would also just, in conclusion, mention that I think we have to be careful that we do stick to facts. Like the author of that article is a teacher or professor of public policy, so I don't think he was operating on children's fiction. I mean, that was a fact-based public policy approach. And I also would not make the mistake of scaring the public, also in an inaccurate manner, of saying, hey, if we start to charge you fairly on your water rates, watch out, because the only result then is to look at raising your property taxes. That's patently false, as I explained to Ms. Grote yesterday when we spoke on the phone. So the same savings and offsets that we could achieve through cutting non-essential items of appropriate governance, and we can do it in a planned fashion, as Alder Martin suggested, in a planned incremental fashion over the years. But make no mistake, we could ultimately probably offset phasing out the pilot just by starting to cut out the pork. all right, in our spending and our budget. And I think there's enough pork probably to make a very large sandwich in any annual budget that we're entertaining. So thank you for considering this tonight, but I do think really the fact-based approach is that whether it's now or following this budget cycle, we start to plan how to phase this out. It has nothing to do with water, and it puts the greatest burden on lower income residents, working class residents, and middle class residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that that is certainly a discussion we can have in the first half of 2024 before we take flight with next year's budget process. I think that we have to be realistic, though, to know that, if the plan is to, cut 50 or 100,000 out of a budget, that's a whole lot different than cutting 1.5 million. So a phased approach makes some sense. I think that it is not false to let people be realistic, to realize that if we cut funding to the budget in one area, and the proposed cuts are things that people want and appreciate, that it's very possible that the levy may go up to offset some of those decreases. I think people would be surprised how little pork and fat exists in our budget. I think that the days of leaning out certain things like that have long gone, unless you're willing to get rid of workforce or amenities. So, we had a time, I've been doing this budget thing now for 16 years, and there was a time where it was not real difficult for departments to propose a budget for themselves that came with a 10% cut. But we got to a point where it was next to impossible to do that, because you get to a point where you've trimmed a lot of that. And since those days, councils before us and we have added a lot of things that solve problems in the community and bring value. And so every time we add workforce, every time we give raises, every time we change benefits, every time we ratify a contract where people are getting, 2, 3, 4, 5% raises, that money comes from someplace. And so, a lot of that comes from the levy. So, I think we have to be realistic in our expectations, and we should never promise people that the levy will be reduced by a commensurate amount, because it's absolutely possible that it won't. But I think it's a good discussion for us to have. I think all the points that were made here tonight are valid. If there's a way to, at least step down a reduction, maybe we won't get to zero, but, do we get to a point at some point where we've reduced that payment by 25 to 50%? I don't know. But I'd like to know, what the impact would be and if it's possible. I think we should conduct that research in here. This is the committee that does that stuff. The Water Commission also is a part of that. We don't run the water utility ourselves. That commission has to be hand in hand with us. We can't just slice their payment obligations without some input from that independent commission. So, I guess, where are you guys at with the resolution that we have in the packets, which basically holds the line for this year?
Has the Water Commission weighed in on this?
I think they've had discussions about things like that, along with the rate case that they were trying to make. For every rate increase, you have a rate case and you have those discussions. You'd have the same process and discussions for a decrease. I think that, through the discussion of their financials, when they were preparing that rate case and, what they were about to take on in terms of debt and their obligations, they're certainly aware of the pilot payment. I don't think they've talked about a reduction. I guess the mayor chairs that, so I've not attended that. I don't know. Eric, do you know if the Water Commission has talked about the pilot payment and its impact, or about a request for a reduction? They've not? He says they've not. So, obviously that's a discussion that we would have with them in concert. We wouldn't make a decision alone.
So then what would be the good next step? And I may differ from Alder Killian and going to zero, but I think if we could go from 18% to 10% in a reasonable period of time, that would be, that's a close to 50% crack right there. And we need to maybe set the course for that, so
Right.
that we can we logically look at this mid-year, Mary Ann, or we commit to this now and we're.
Well, we can definitely invite Ellers to the next meeting. Again, we had a lot of estimates in our rate study that we just, that concluded early in 2023 with the rates going up July 1. So we would still have a lot of unknowns at this point if we started down a rate study path, because we don't have a full year of the new plant in operation, as well as we don't know all of our costs for the GAC because of the bill. So, but I think they would be able to give us some advice on what they think the timing should be.
Right. And I think it really starts with a discussion in this committee, at least as a future agenda item, whether we do that in, January, February, whatever. The budget process takes flight in midsummer, and so I think for us to start to gather information about what's possible, that maybe we could shoot for that in the first quarter of '24.
Okay.
We need to at least start a discussion whereby we're getting some information about the up and down side. The new water plant went online last year at Christmas time. We're coming up on that year. I don't know if we've had a full year, though, with the wastewater. That was still in the works yet when the water plant came on, right?
Yeah.
We're almost to the year on the water. Eric's nodding. So, by the time we get to the midpoint of 2024, we may have that data for what a year of this new business all costs. Knowing that this year we spent an extra six-figure amount to replace resin that we won't have to replace going forward once, the GAC is more renewable. So, we had that expense too that's not going to be a recurring thing if this GAC thing goes like we think.
So we might save that 1.1 million or whatever we have budgeted.
I think that resin was 800,000,
Was
wasn't it?
800,000,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right,
And-
so, go ahead.
Oh, so I believe the PSC has, and I'm sorry, I cannot think of the word, but they have like a base year that they look at when they're establishing rates. And I guess that's my concern is we won't have that year. So they use a calendar year, and it is like the year, and I cannot think of, it's like a test year.
So it has
Is
to
that-
be-
Test year, yes.
Test year.
And so.
So is it a full year of normal function, though?
Yes. and
So if you're
I think-
operating in a reduced capacity, it's not accurate? Is that?
Right, that's what I'm thinking, but I think, again, if we asked Ellers to come and give a presentation of where if this is a goal that the council has, that they could outline a strategy of when they think is the appropriate time to accomplish it.
Right.
The
And
other
in what
point-
bites? In what,
Right.
in what step down?
And I'm not, again, sure that we will see all of the savings, because one thing that was not included in the rate study were the additional positions that the utility has determined are necessary. They would not allow us to include those in that rate study. So, again, there's lots of moving parts, and
Well, and just
We may
recently,
not-
there was a request to increase pay for some of those individuals that, failed in the HR committee without some further research. But I think once that research comes online, if they find out that they need to keep up with market and pay people better, you don't want to get behind the eight ball where you can't afford to pay the people you have and then you start to lose them as well. That's kind of an unknown for us as well. There has to be, I'm interested in the presentation from Ellers, though, because there has to be a reason on this list that out of 21 Wisconsin communities, only 3 are forgiving. There's got to be a reason for that. And not to say that we shouldn't charge less. I think maybe we can figure that out. But, I think it needs to be a financial advisor type conversation. Because, we sometimes think we can try to make assumptions, but when they're involved in the nuts and bolts of what makes up the utilities financials, they can probably give us better guidance. So,
Can I ask one last
sure,
one?
go ahead.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
So I just recalled the number 1.5 million as what we went to last year, but obviously it's 1.59, so we got 90,000. Is that
yeah,
what it was?
1,590,000.
It was
Yes.
590. Okay.
Okay, all right,
So
so,
if we approve it, we can still come back 2 weeks at the next council meeting and maybe offer some more guidance on that.
well, if we don't pass a resolution to take less, we have to take the 2 million.
Yeah.
That's
No, I
where we're,
understand, but
that's the,
if
that's
we
the,
wanted to take it to 1.4,
Oh.
is now the time to ask for that, or should we wait until we have the data for the next
I think we
meeting?
need data. I think if we just throw a dart, that we're not going to know what the impact of that is going to be. Especially if we're not going to see an immediate rate decrease. So if we kneecap our budget with that dollar figure, and then the rates don't go down, all you're left with, that's, Because you essentially, if you pare down that pilot this year without sufficient data, you have to make some kind of cut to the 2024 budget to balance. And, you know, we just came out of 4 workshops in a place where we felt like we had the best product. So, you know, and if the water rate is unaffected for this year, it feels like it's a little bit of an empty gesture. I think that, you know, all they're asking us to do is decide if we're willing to take less. You know, are we willing to freeze this amount at the 1.59? Because if we don't, we're going to be stuck with 2 million, and then the water utilities situation is way worse. I mean, it feels like a binary decision to me. Go ahead.
Well, the other option, I think what we're debating here is, do we take it lower than 1.59? I'm not suggesting we don't do anything and go to 2. That would be suicidal.
Right? For sure. I don't know. The decision we have in front of us today is to pass a resolution that freezes that item at 1.59. So, I mean, if there's a question that people want to talk about at the next council meeting as to what the true impact is of taking it lower, we would have to gather that data for that meeting. We don't have it tonight. So, I mean, it's hard to agree to just pick some arbitrary amount and not know what the impact is. We know what the impact is on the 1.59. That's what we've analyzed. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I'd be concerned about taking it lower than the 1.59 because our numbers are already baked into the budget, and then we're going to have to go back and figure out where we're going to take, you know, how we're going to make up the difference. You know, we did a lot of staving off increases with in the water utility by using ARPA funding to cover a lot of projects. I just, you know, I'm really concerned with the number of unknowns with totally eliminating this pilot payment. You know, what it's going to do to, you know, the city's budget fiscally, what it's going to do. You know, it's not going to cause any immediate relief, and a rate case is going to be harder until we have enough data from the power plant, you know, from the water plant operation, and especially, you know, with us waiting another 6 months or so until that GAC system gets online. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we just need to hold the course right now because it's just while it's a feel good, it's empty at this point in time
Right.
because it's not gonna save anybody any money.
Right.
And a gesture to go lower is going to cost us more money in the end.
Well,
So,
and my feeling is just based on how this has played out in the past, if we were to make an arbitrary decision, you know, in the 11th hour to cut that amount, the first place those cuts often come from are supplements and capital. And so we already cut the heck out of the capital list. I mean, we left half the capital list on the cutting room floor this summer. We elevated one project off that list, which was the equipment for this room, because it fails often. But, you know, I also think that we were judicious about what staffing requests we allowed, and so the situations that necessitated the need for those aren't really going away. I mean, that's where those cuts, they used to come from streets and roads and parks, and we see what the cumulative effect of that was. So, you know, the next logical choice is capital and supplements.
yeah,
You know?
no, exactly. And, you know, I know we've been talking about this tangentially for the last 3 or 6 months, you know, and the pilot's always been in the back of our mind during the budget sessions.
Yeah.
But still, it's just, you know, we don't know, you know, we don't know what we don't know at this point in time.
Right.
Until we can, you know, get a firm grip around what the actual cost is going to be for the treatment plants. So
Sure.
you know, if I'm ready to make a motion that we forgive or take the calculated rate at the 1.59 million, I believe is
Right, which then allows for that forgiveness and freezes the amount at what it was last year.
correct.
Okay, is there a second for Mike's motion? Carol, second? Okay, so we have a second from Lukens, motion from Martins. Any additional comment? Go ahead, Carol.
I just wanted to say that I agree. While no one wants higher rates. We don't like lower rates for everyone, definitely, because, we know this is a hardship, but I feel like we went through all of the different requests with a fine tooth comb. Like, we really went through, and I just can't, I don't know, kind of feel like it's the best option we have right now.
It is for this year, I feel like, too.
Thank you.
Doug, did you have a last comment?
Yeah, last
Go ahead.
comment. I
Yep.
guess I'd be okay with doing this if we had a true commitment to looking at the strategy. So, I mean, at this point, I want to see what happens next week, but I think we do need to commit to a strategy here long
Well,
term.
I'm here to tell you that, I mean, as in 2024, I'm still the finance chairman, and I will absolutely take up that discussion in a future agenda. So, if you want it in January, February, whenever you want it, Mary Ann will bring the appropriate information, and if we need Phil Cosson here, we'll get him here. So, I mean, that's as much of a commitment as I can give you. We'll have a public discussion about it on live TV. So, I mean, and whatever result we all decide is best, that's what we'll go with. So, it's not hard to make that commitment because we're willing to talk about all of these ideas. It's just a matter of whether we come out the other side in a different place. I mean, we have to decide what's best from the health of the utility, from the ratepayers, from the taxpayer, and from our budget. There's different components there, so we can absolutely have that discussion. Any additional comments? If not, with a motion and a second on the floor then to pass a resolution to hold the pilot payment for 2024 at last year's amount, members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. It was good discussion. Thank you, everyone, for that. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action on approving the city's accepted counteroffer to purchase 811 and 815 Grand Avenue and the related budget modification. This item was also posted for closed session, but we actually took open session action on this item. We set the price and we voted on it in open session. So I'm not confident that we need closed session for this. In fact, unless something has changed in the parameters of the sale, I guess let's just bring up our economic development manager, Randy, if this actually has come together the way we proposed, I think we're okay to approve it in open. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. And yes, good things to report. Went through the process of ordering appraisal and phase 1 for the property. Asking price or our counter offer was accepted at $805,000. The appraisal came in higher at $870,000.
Okay.
So that checks that box. We did a phase 1 through REI. They completed the REI, completed the environmental, and there was no recognized environmental conditions. And their recommendation was that no additional inquiry was required. So both those boxes are checked. So I think that that's as much as I can offer you on it.
Okay, that makes this easy because that's what we wanted to know. Is there a motion then to approve the finalization of this purchase? Motion from Watson, is there a second? Second from Martins. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, opposed? None are opposed, that motion carries. And even with our robust discussion, we will finish in time for the council meeting at 6:30. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion from Dinny, second from Lukens. Members in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? No one ever is. So we'll stand adjourned and we'll get set up for council in 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone.